A little bit of TVP, different flavor than the one that we started the day off with. Let's find out how different, Bayo.
Yeah, I'm excited about it because this is a map that apparently Classic won against. Well, we knew Classic won against Oliveira, but this is how, in part, Stats did a similar thing to Clem. So let's see if they can pull it off. But for now, upper right in the blue for Team Liquid, it's Clem.
And his opponent in the bottom left, the red Protoss player, he is Classic.
So this seems to be a map, Nate, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Maybe this isn't worth talking about for another 10 minutes, but this seems to be a map that Protoss players love to send as late as possible. Get onto 3-star gate carrier, and maybe, just maybe, if you're feeling it extra spicy, you put a Nexus in the middle of the map to get some not fleet beacons, to get some shield batteries going with that full energy and really get the hard push going. But in general, seems to be a map that Protoss players are having a lot of success with on this kind of 4-base carrier play. Clem's already lost to it once today. Classic's already won with it once today. Is that something you expect to see again?
I definitely think we'll see more of it. You know, it's one of those styles that there are things that people say don't work or are bad strategically, but what they really mean is they're very difficult to make work, and getting into scenarios where you can do some of those builds regularly is not, let's say, reasonable to expect. But I think that it's been exposed for a little bit, and some players, when I think about guys that have been doing it for a long time, think about a guy like Skillis, you know, who would bust something like that out, and you'd be like, wow, I can't believe he took a game off of Clem. That's crazy. You know, Clem is so much better than a guy like that, and you would have some of these one-off things. But I really do think it has to do with a lot of that stubbornness that we see out of Terrans when it comes to picking their compositions, and it's one of the things I feel like we've gotten to see an increasing amount of, and I do expect to see it throughout this tournament and future events this year. But making that late air transition against the Bio-Terran, who more or less, you know, they'll say again, oh, Marine, good unit, but they're never really making more than like 20 or 30% of their army supply actually Marines, because they're making so many Ghosts and Marauders and Vikings and Medevacs, and you're not getting into a situation where it's just like, yeah, they're just going to gun down the Interceptors, no problem. It's like there's a lot of other units there. There's going to be Colossus with them. You can't just do that. So it forces such a conundrum on the Terran's army composition, but it also carriers are the most expensive units that Protoss can make. So it's not like you can rush them either, because then you do get overwhelmed. So Classic, we saw a bit of that earlier, played it out to that 3-4 base, and then you transition to it. And I have to agree with you. I think Alcyon is a big map for it, largely because you have this staging area in front of the natural where you can kind of go between those 3 different bases without having to expose yourself too much. But let's see what Clem gets done here, as he's got his little starport proxied across the map. He is expanding behind it, but it's going to be an early Hellion drop by the looks of things.
Yeah, I really like this out of Clem for everything we talked about. You know, on the one hand, maybe going late game on this map against Protoss feels bad. He's lost to it once already. We've seen both Protoss players that we've seen. Well, I don't know how Australia did. Certainly he lost to Hero Marine, but in general, we've seen Stats and Classic or Korean Protoss players make it work on this map. On top of that, well, Classic in his last series, he got shoved over by early aggression, and even further, this is a blink opening. Twilight openers against a Hellion drop is just about the worst possible thing. Stargate would be very happy. As it stands, this is going to get a lot of damage done here. Probes are splitting as well as they can, because the Stalkers, they don't have blink. They just have to, like, I'm going to run, and we're going to defend it eventually, guys. I promise. Meanwhile, 10, 12, 14 probes go down. This is getting to the point. This is game-breaking damage at this point. Magic number's 8. Anything more than that says you're very happy. And this is 12. Not plus an adept, but plus damage. This is 12 workers, Nate. That is, it hurts. It does not spark joy.
Yeah, the only upside here is that, again, it felt like he tried to respond reasonably well, but that's why this build is popular. That's why Clem does this. That's why this build is very frustrating to play against. Those Hellions get in and they are so fast. Even with the split, he gets so many worker kills, 12 total. So you talk about Terran versus Protoss, and the way that this matchup typically develops is these days the Protoss is usually the one grabbing the third base first. They're supposed to be with that chrono boost against the Mule somewhere in the realm of like 7 or 8 workers ahead by that point, and then it's supposed to get a little bit better. And the Terran wants to harass and try to cull that economy. But when you get that much damage done that early, you can pretty much throw it all out the window. Clem can just focus on getting towards whatever his first timing is going to be, and it is highly likely that he will have enough to break Classic if he can control well against whatever army is waiting when that time comes. So as far as I want to get some damage done and set myself up for a much easier game goes, Clem is soaring high.
Now, would you like to see a bunker in the main? I know that maybe it's probably just a little bit too much, but Clem also understands that Classic doesn't macro his way. I guess if you let him sit there for 10 minutes and let him do the Mario thing, maybe Classic macros his way out of this. But realistically, Classic is not going to be able to macro out of this before Clem's next hit happens. But you know what? Even as I say that, Stim's going to be done pretty soon. He's got 3 tanks is generally what you'd like to go defend against some sort of blink pressure. But I guess he's kind of realized with everything that's happening that Classic is not going to get aggressive here, which again, I think that's what Classic's one avenue back into the game was. And if he's not going to go for it,
what was in Classic space when Clem was there? Because the Hellions saw everything. There are only 2 gateways on the map. There still are only 2 gateways on the map. So does he have blink? Sure. But if he were to be aggressive at all, he'd have absolutely nothing. And even right now, as he pushes across, yes, a Colossus is being made, but I'll say it again. There's only 2 gateways, so he's not building that much. He's going to be relying primarily on a shield battery overcharge and an unupgraded Colossus to defend against this attack. He doesn't even have extended thermal lance started, so how do you deal? And you have 2 gateway blink stalker against tanks and marines with stim, and he's just going to run up the ramp. I thought this might take a little more time, but he is just Clem realized it. He knows, okay, there's not a lot you can do here. Pull the marines behind the marauders, let the tanks zone away the Colossus, and as soon as Classic tries to dive into this to save the third base, that's more or less going to decide it. If he can clean all this up and keep his third alive, then maybe there's hope for a miracle. But losing this third is just going along with everything else we've talked about in this match so far. Colossus does try to make the save, not enough, and there it is. GG for Clem, as a very, very sharp timing to follow up. Like you mentioned, his first attack that was going to hit, there was hardly anything ready for it, and that's what happens when Hellions kill 12 probes.
Well, they killed even more than that one, because Clem, as he's posturing around this third base and saying, look, be very afraid. This is a problem. Even as that's happening, well, he's put the Hellions back in the main base, and they got like 4 or 5 more probes. So you talk about miracles being needed. Classic had only just barely gotten his worker count up above Clem's, which, when we consider a context of Mules, that's really bad. And then 6 more workers go down, and he goes down to 42 versus 47. It's like, okay, you're losing in the main, you're losing in the third. You're kind of dead. He was dead anyways, but nice job from Clem, kind of shaking off maybe some slowness out of his fingers, playing just about as fast as we generally expect him to play. And now we're going to get into game 2 eventually. What do you want to see differently? Oh, wait, I joined the wrong game. That is OBS B. That is not the right game.
There we go. There's our lobby. I see it. I'm crawling in there to go harvest some more StarCraft for you guys. We got this.
What do you want to see, though? That's kind of an important question here as we get into game 2. Classic, he's done the exact same opener almost. 3 game. This was a 2-gate this time, but I think that was by necessity as he tried to find his way back into the game and you try to cut some corners. He's done the exact same opener. This is 4 games in a row now. Quick Twilight, Blink, 3-gate behind, getting the Colossus. At a certain point, you're going to get figured out. So is this a Stargate now? Or do you go 4-gate? Do you go...
Well, how about this? There's other things to take away from the way that opening played out too. Classic opened with 2 gateways and went Twilight Robo. And his stalkers were at the front of his base. And I think something that maybe Clem has picked up on, and I don't think it's possible for him to have seen that first series that happened today, but it happened a little bit earlier versus... the other Terran player whose name I'm now magically blanking on as well that we just cast, Oliveira, is that he's been going out on the map, right? The Stalkers are trying to zone away the Reapers. He's kind of trying to play for this map control. And sometimes when you feel like those Hellions are going to be coming up, you know, it's not uncommon for Protoss to throw down just 1 or 2 buildings in front of the natural to kind of block that. You want to be able to block it with like 1 Zealot Warp in if you see it coming on the minimap or on the screen fast enough. And then you want to have something in your main. But that's what happens when you proxy, right? The medevac gets there 20, 30 seconds earlier than it normally would. And that 20, 30 seconds could have been the difference between having that wall off and having those stalkers in the main or not. So it's hard to say, but I think it's another reminder that Alcyon's one of those great maps where you just got to go super far out of your way to either cheese in that spot, but you also have to go crazy far out of your way to scout it too.
And we're going to have to see now whether Classic can figure things out and maybe stabilize that early game just a little bit more, because in the bottom right, he's down a game. Again, losing here would go to the knockout bracket. Not out of the tournament just yet, but he wants to move on, wants to have that better seeding. It's Classic.
And he faces off against the man in blue in the Northwest. A fantastic macro player, but that's the hardest part, because he'll still do all those little gut check openings that aren't necessarily going to win, but still can win. He's Clem. Look at that SC where it's going on the bottom side here too. It does look like it's going to head towards the natural, but the route he took could have veered off. He is going double gas after the barracks, so quite a few options on the table for Clem if he wants to get aggressive.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. You talked about how, well, okay, maybe Classic walls off the natural and puts a bunch of stalkers in the main base. The problem is, oh man, Classic Clem here. This man, we don't see a lot of eBay blocks, Nate, but Clem, for whatever reason, and I think in part just he is so fast, he has so much confidence in his plays. Like, yeah, you know, I might put myself down by 10%, but my eBay block is gonna mess with you more, and I will take that trade. But when we talk about this, okay, so it's like, okay, say for the sake of example, you block off the main base in game number 1, you got some stalkers in the main base. That drop still gets damage done because there's no blink, right? The way you shut that down in its entirety is maybe you have a couple of deaths, which no one really makes, or you go Phoenix, because then you can lift them up. That, from the build order perspective, it almost feels like that is guaranteed to do damage if you're just kind of against it.
Especially if you don't see it coming, like not knowing about the starport or the angle that it took. Like it's not a bad thing to want to take the middle of the map so that you can see if you're being attacked, but the situationalness of it is what makes it so tough, because everybody plays very respectfully of Clem, since he is the top dog. He is the top dog, especially as far as the Terrans outside of Korea go. And everybody looks up to him. People want to copy him. He's at that point now where if you're preparing for this matchup, you're watching his games, even if you're not playing against him. He's going to give you a good example of what high-level Terran players are doing across the board. And he doesn't lean more aggressive than none, but he does stuff like this where, even though it didn't end up being any super cheesy, even though it wasn't like, oh, I have the factory or the starport out there, it was, I'm going to open double gas, hit you with a quick eBay block, and then have my factory up so fast behind it that you can't really counter and do much. But he should be able to delay this natural a little bit, and that'll be a very nice feather in his cap.
Yeah, I like that. Just getting damage done with the probe early on, which means this SCV will struggle a little bit more. Now Adept absolutely fights 2 Marines, so he's going to knock those down. SCVs are pulled. Zealot runs across. Widowmine knocks that down, but that means the Adept is still here, and this is a lot more. We talked about how you can make your opponent uncomfortable, right? That's what Clem was doing. eBay blocking, being annoying, Hellion drop, all these things. Anything you can do to make your opponent not feel safe in a game of StarCraft 2 is incredibly worth doing. And this Adept living as long as it has, 4 kills to its name. Yeah, it eventually goes down, but Nate, it delayed the natural. It killed off a couple Marines. It killed SCVs. It got a full scout of the main base. Classic knows everything that's happening, and he slowed Clem down. That's actually, you know what? Second thing to talk about here. I am really surprised Clem took the natural on the low ground. Generally, if you go for an eBay block, you put it on the high ground strictly because of this opportunity. So I don't know, that's Clem getting it a little bit too big for his britches. I don't know, but even still, a little bit odd.
Yeah, well, he's playing confidently too. I mean, he's up 1-0 in the series, and I think the idea of that build to have the fast factory follow up with the Widowmine is nice. It just burrowed like a second after the Adept stepped past it. Really, if he shuts the Adept down, then I think it's all gravy for him. There's not too much else for Classic to really do with here. He does have a little bit of the Marine drop with that 1 mine, so I think the Marines will end up being a little bit annoying, buy a little bit of time and then try to burrow the mine, but good focus fire from Classic. He shuts it down, and looks like he's gonna lose just 3 probes. The Marines get a couple focus fired at the end, but not too shabby. The engineering bay block is interesting too, though, because even sometimes the question pops up that it's like, well, how does this mess with the Terran's build? How does this mess with you? Well, Classic is such a macro focused player. We do have to wonder, even if I think he looks like he's handled this somewhat well, he's up about 40 probes to 33 SCVs. This is more within the margin that we're expecting in this matchup. So he's in a much better position than we've seen previously, and he's going to spot the Liberator coming in. But he's the guy that wants to play the macro too. So having that base slowed down for any reason, that could just be another one of those little mind games by Clem where he's saying, I want you to start thinking about two base. I want you to do a two base push. I want you to think about this this game ending a little bit faster so that we don't get it slowed down into this big tech up fight that you were discussing earlier.
Yeah, that's fair. Granted, again, Classic has been playing very defensively every single game of this tournament. He's been going to this, yes, Blink certainly, but Robo Bay before third base, getting those Colossus out, because again, I think it's fair to say that he feels really good about the late game right now. I haven't talked to him, we don't really know, but just based off the play. So for now, Stalkers are gonna try to find something, damage on an auto turret, but more importantly, it means this auto turret energy from the Raven is not going to be spent on the other side of the map. And of course, Clem going with what he's going for. There's no Raven upgrades, right? There's no interference matrix, nothing to really put pressure on the Colossus. This Raven is just meant to get some harassment damage, but we've already had 2 harassment options. Liberator didn't pay out at all. Widowmine drop, it got 3 probes, not a ton with considering how much was committed there. So Classic, if he defends this one, again, that's going to be 3 straight aggressive options that we've seen Clem go for to try to put pressure on a Classic. And none of them have really worked. And if you commit that much, Nate, to aggression, to damage, to making things happen, when it doesn't work out, it just puts you behind.
Yeah, and sometimes you try to get a little bit of that value back just from what response you force out of them. Even if you don't get what you want, sometimes you can still end up getting what you need, right, to keep moving forward from that position. It's the age-old argument in StarCraft where people are like, well, what time of the game can you not go all in anymore? And it's like, well, have you ever played a game of poker? You can go all in on any hand. You can fold on any hand. Strategy is about waiting for your moment. And sometimes passing up an early one to try and take a bigger one later, sometimes that can be the move. Liberator gets shut down again on the south side. So good awareness from Classic, and this is what we expect, is that defensive play. He's held it down nicely, but he's not letting Clem just walk across the map either.
I think, again, Classic here, he wants to get himself up to 3 Colossus. He wants to get charged on combat shield, or not combat shield, extend thermal lance, +1 eventually, getting into Storm, and all of this like really powerful mid-game ball. So he's very happy, again, just sit here, shut things down, force Clem to attack into him. I mean, you hold the high ground like this, Colossus have extended thermal lance. We're gonna see a lot of stuff go down very quickly. Good force fields there as well. So Clem, yeah, eventually the tanks are gonna siege up and you gotta back up here, but this is Marines against Colossus, and that is never a fight you want to take. Notice, by the way, Classic's holding this position under the scan because he's got that observer right there. Also, it's a really good fight, but he holds that position, so the bio, even as it retreats, can't get the observer. Minor efficiencies, but at this point, there's not a single Viking on the map, Nate. We have 3 Colossus on the map. Storm on the way, sure, +1 on the way. But Classic had a very real opportunity, if he decided to go for it, to slam across the map with 3 Colossus, a bunch of charge lots, and really try to punish Clem. Looks like he's not. He'd rather go late game. Always a little scary against Clem, but the game goes on, and again, Classic is very happy with where he is right now.
Yeah, he's got opportunity to deal damage. He has the Prism out on the map. I think when we talk about that series versus Oliveira, something that is going to stand out to me probably forever from that was he lost almost all of his Prisms. I think Oliveira did a really good job of dealing with them, but at the same time, you have to recognize when you can or can't commit, or when your opponent is or isn't ready. So he's made good use of them in all of his series, but hasn't necessarily gotten what he was looking for out of them. So as long as he can keep these alive, apply that pressure, and not lose the ability to warp in reinforcements later, I think that's a really big deal. But stuff like this is what I'm talking about. That Prism on the north end does get snatched up, and it's just hard when you play this style because you are mostly sitting back. You want to send zealots around the corners, but if you're doing that, then obviously you're going to run into the Terran defenses. So that Prism becomes so much more important for Clem. You just want to make sure that you don't move out of your base until you're ready to deal with that Prism in your base, right, without your army. So that's always one of those things in the back of your mind is, oh, am I going to be halfway across the map and need to stim home? Because that's one of the worst feelings that you can have. Clem's been playing this one pretty close to the chest.
He has been, but again, that's because he hasn't really had the tech required. He got aggressive 3 different times, nothing happened. I mean, you killed 3 probes. That's not shutting the Protoss down at all. So that means that Classic has been able to leapfrog things. Colossus are done. 4th base is done. And Clem at this point, if he attacked into this army, it would not go well for the Frenchman. I mean, there are enough chokes, there are enough. We saw him try it once, right? The Colossus like, yeah, I got force fields. Your Marines are dead. Have fun. And that gives Classic so much time now. As I look at this, Clem is transitioning, right? That's kind of what you look at to see where we go in here. And Clem, he's adding in more starports, +1 air attacks on the way. He's adding in more Vikings and more ghosts, and he kind of understands, it seems to, where Classic wants to take this game, and the scan should, the scan should confirm that he saw the fleet beacon. So Clem knows what's happening. 4th base is going to be on the way eventually, is going to float over. And now becomes the question, can Clem build an army that beats what Classic is going for fast enough before Classic hits him with it?
That's the ultimate question. That's the ultimate question. Again, the whole thing with Terran is you have these really complicated, well-balanced out armies with highly technical specialist units. He's got Vikings, he's got a couple tanks, we have the ghosts coming out. There's 24 Marines, and that is the unit that is going to matter the most when that conversation happens about dealing with these carriers, because what do we have again from Classic when we think about what's worked for him so far? It's the Storm with the carrier and the Colossus. It's so difficult. He made it so tough for Oliveira to try and get the Vikings close to his air units with the Storm. So it boiled down to the EMPs, but then that's where everything else is just shepherding those carriers around. So for Clem, he's maxed out, and this is going to be a good opportunity to try and go do something since he's giving the least amount of time for this carrier transition to happen. 3 just started, are getting chrono boosted. That's a significant amount of the supply being held out of this fight. The supply looks even right now, but a decent amount of it is 3 carriers and a mothership.
That being said, there's a lot of static defense here. There's a ton of splash damage. This is a defensible position for Classic, but he has to do it well. So for now, feedbacks on a couple ghosts. If you can knock down EMPs off them, that means your storms are going to be a lot more powerful. But for now, the first one's not going to work out. And I love how patient we're seeing Clem play this. 2 tanks on the high ground. Damage being done to this static defense, making it that much easier to push in. The storms are landing, but they're enough medevacs for now. So they're bleeding energy. This army, for the most part, will be able to find its way forward. This is the problem, though, as we take a look at how... Oh, nice feedbacks, too. If you can get storms on the Vikings and you can take their damage down, all of a sudden this army becomes so hard to fight into. And for now, the Vikings, they're still there. The storms aren't really landing, but like 1 or 2 more all of a sudden becomes a little bit more of a problem. And here comes Classic up the high ground. His mothership's done. The carriers are done. He was patient enough. And this army has become so much harder for Clem to fight. Certainly, as he runs away from it, you kite away, certainly. But the Liberators, they're gonna, or not the Liberators, the Interceptors, they're gonna leash, and they continue to get that damage done.
Yeah, and we see there that, I mean, again, this is how this army composition works. It's really easy to just say that the Vikings will shoot the carriers if they're in range. But good luck getting that to happen if you don't make the required moves beforehand. The EMPs did not get the Templar. I think the tanks had an opportunity to get them as well earlier when they were first going up the ramp. He kind of missed that, and now he's got a little bit less, and he still has to deal with this full force as the Interceptors get rebuilt. He still has the Immortals and the Stalkers on the ground, so it's not as simple as, oh, I'm just going to dive the carriers and shut them down. No, he's got to get through the zoning of those Templar. 1 EMP does get the majority of them. Another storm drops, however. I don't think he's got too many more. I think 1 more just became available to him, but the 3rd base gets eradicated. That north side expansion, he's going to pass on it for now. But we really see this is where Classic just puts on that crazy pressure. You start taking punches against the Terran economy, secures the southwest base while all of this is happening. And aside from that, he's just gonna go home, maybe regroup. But I think he's got to feel pretty good with what he walked away from. Clem is still close to max, but his whole bank is gone.
Yeah, that move, though, to go and try to take down the Ghost, we saw the Stalkers move forward. They went in 1 at a time, probably not the most efficient thing there. But again, you talked about it. Taking this base down, knocking down, I think it was 24 SCVs, is a big deal. Clem, though, the other side of this, Nate, Clem still got a bunch of mules. And on only 59 SCVs, that is a 141 max army supply. Clem can build a more technical army. He can build a bigger army. And the hard part about this composition for Protoss, it is incredibly strong right now. What are we at? Like 6 carriers, 5 carriers, a couple Colossus, Storm. The Terran player can out tech it, right? The Terran player can build an army eventually that is the strongest army in the game that can handle this. And that's why Classic continues to get aggressive off these 77 workers. You build, you take economy down for the Terran, you get your own economy up, and then you just lean into them over and over again with this technical army, and you don't let them build the army that you can make, that you can really find value with. But now those snipes on the High Templar, a really nice job of knocking down some of the power of this army. The Vikings are going to start to show up, though. There are so many stalkers here. I don't think they can take this fight.
It's just never that simple, right? But what is the army really missing, and what do you already need to deal with it? It's a splash. The biggest thing that's stopping him from overwhelming this with like pretty much nothing but just Marines and Ghosts would be whatever little bit of splash there is. But the Ghosts already deal with that with the EMP. The other problem is that there's still a Colossus alive. So how do you get on top of that and even try to get to the point where you're just massing out on all of these barracks that you have? Well, you're just not. That's why this composition is good. That's why I'd like to see it out of Protoss. It's underrated. It's very strong. It's difficult to get to. I'll admit that. But you love to see it when it works, because you get the feeling from the Terran player. They kind of just expect to be able to kite against it, throw a few EMPs, and just kill everything with the stutter step on the Ghosts and the Marines. But the carrier-backed standard Protoss army is extremely good and asks for a little bit of a different response, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it right now. Any game that a Protoss player builds themselves a nice position in the early game, they're like, yep, great, 4 bases, carriers, we're going to go. Because I know that you won't have the time for your armor upgrades for the Vikings. Like go double armory, for example. I know that you won't have time to get enough Vikings out and Liberators to zone out my High Templar and all of these things. Because we talked about it. It requires an intensely technical army from the Terran, much in the same way that the Protoss player has that technical army. And if you have the tempo lead in the game, getting to that point feels really hard. It's expensive. So,
yeah. The thing, it's like I don't know. I've in my whole career, I've largely felt that in many of these scenarios, like the Viking can really just be a trap unit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, imagine without Tempests, if you had some ranged Liberators or something, just being able to zone a little bit of that anti-ground, this splash, because the statement that the Marines and Ghosts on their own can handle the carriers is very true. You know, you don't have to try and zone the carriers away. You kind of know how to zone everything else away. So whether we see adjustments made for that or not is one thing. I expect most Terrans' response to these situations to be to just play more aggressively in the next game and try not to let the Protoss get there. We do have the map being picked, but I think that's just a really important aspect of this, is that there has to be a consideration on the Terran strategically of ways to break this down other than just jumping on it. But jumping on it clearly doesn't work. We've seen it fail twice today.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, like, okay, so if the Terran player can get up like a ton of Ghosts, right? And then you get Vikings, sure, Liberators to zone out the ground. Do you eventually... I've seen some players do it. I don't know how I feel about it necessarily, but 3/3 Thor's highest DPS in the game. Like, do you eventually go there? They knock the carriers down, but
if you're gonna spend money like that, I mean, truthfully, the best answer to carriers anyway is battle cruisers if you can get them upgraded.
True, actually, yeah.
The reason you don't see it is because it's the same reason why you don't see the carriers that much, right? It's the Protoss can't just make 3 Stargates and start cranking out carriers while the Terran's trying to drop them with 7 racks on 4 bases everywhere. That's a very reasonable thing to say, and people would say, well, how are you going to go up to battle cruisers while you're trying to deal with this Stalker Ball or all of these other units, pushing around the outside? So it is a very tough thing to do. We've seen players like TY and Maru do it in the Uber late game. It will always be something that I like to see, but is Clem going to suddenly do that? I think he'll probably try to win the game a different way and not, I think, probably try something else. But if it gets to that crazy late game situation, I just don't really feel like Vikings ever cut it if the Protoss is paying attention with their Templar. Unless you get the full EMP on everything beforehand, and even the one time he did it, there were still Stalkers there. It's not like the army is only only carriers. So
yeah, it's one of those things where you, as a Terran player, when in the late game, you have to be prepared to fight 2 armies. You have to fight the high-tech carrier, Colossus, Storm. I love the addition of the Immortals adding in as well. It's actually a lot of damage on the ground. The sneaky Immortals in this matchup. But then you have 8 gateways, 10 gateways, 12 gateways, Zealots, Stalkers warping in on the top of it. And it's like, okay, you built your army to beat the carriers. great, you've done that. But now there are a bunch of stalkers on the map and zealots, and you need a bit of a different answer. So it becomes even more difficult. We're gonna see, I guarantee you we're gonna see an answer to it as this tournament progresses. But for right now, players that are able to pull this off, Classic and Stats, looking extremely good in this matchup. And Nate, we get to see if they're gonna do it one more time, because Game 3 Amphion is up next. And the bottom left here in the blue takes Game 1, falls down to Carriers in Game 2 for Team Liquid. It's Clem.
And the man in the Northwest, the red Protoss player. As we have everything tied up here, he is Classic. And his story's been pretty straightforward today. Game goes long, Classic seems to be pretty comfortable. Game is a little bit on the shorter end. He's not feeling so good. I mean, this is sort of what we expect. Some Protoss players, you know, they get this reputation on the ladder, right? Because you play a guy that you've never seen before and you only get one match against him to prove who's better. And he just kind of kills you really quickly and you're like, huh. But in a tournament, you know, you have a little more time to prepare. People who rely on strategies like that, well, you're going to get mapped out. People are going to expect it. They're going to scout those spots where you do those things. So on the competitive level, you see a completely different composition of strategies out of these Protoss players, and it tends to lean a little more towards defensively up until that 3 base, try and put on a bit of pressure for the Terran while they're taking their third. That's been the legacy of the Void meta, is the Protoss kind of slows the Terran going for the 3rd base, or they take that super fast aggression from the Terran and then just put that huge economy together, the mass gateway man style like you were talking about earlier, which we love to see. But this adjustment to the slower pacing of some of these games on these maps has been nice to see out of Protoss. It's good to see the meta still continue to shift.
Yeah, this I mean, you've always seen Classic, for example, go for Carriers in the super late game occasionally, but this 4-gate or this 4-base 3 Stargate kind of carrier timing that we've been seeing, you know, today is slightly newer, more of a new evolution. We didn't see it at the regionals really all that much, but we've been seeing like EPT Korea and things like that, KSL, like these online cups for the Korean players in like the last 2 weeks or so, is just like the specific way that they're going about it. But thank you, Classic. I was gonna say, I love what Classic's doing here. He has 5 games in a row, more than that maybe. He has gone Twilight into Robo, the exact same 3-gate Twilight into Colossus, whatever, sure. Every single game that he's played in this tournament thus far. And now an Amphion, a map that is really strong for drop. So I think this is a map-specific decision regardless, but he's opening Stargate. He's giving himself that anti-drop defense. And if Clem is gonna be one of these players that says, look at this, I have gone and like my opponent's done the same thing over and over and over again, I'm gonna punish him for it, I'm gonna build a bunch of Hellions. Well, he's gonna have those Phoenix out. He's gonna have the, I don't know if I can say build or counter, but the counter that makes that a lot harder. So Hellions are being made. Now, this is an Oracle first. That's not quite as strong as what we're talking about. That is something we have to talk about. But you know, he is gonna have the opportunity to chrono that out. And for now, Wall's getting started on the high ground.
Yeah, this is what we were talking about the other game, right? That game 1. If the Protoss sniffs this out, that's typically what they'll try to do, and he ends up going a little bit even faster than that normal timing would be. So he ends up without having the wall. Yes, the Oracle is going to pop out, but when you have to immediately spawn the Oracle and use the energy, it's like a double pain, because yes, you did shut it down, but now your opponent knows you have the Oracle, they know you have the Stargate, and you also can't really send the Oracle across to kill stuff. Yeah, you can still scout with it, but you're not going to catch him off guard and microwave 15 SCVs or anything like that. Not that Clem would, of course, let that happen. But what I like about what you said, and perhaps what's more interesting now, is that he is making a second Oracle. I was going to say, having the flexibility of the Stargate when the only thing you lost to in the series so far was the quick drop, it just makes sense, Bayo. It just makes sense. So having the option to go Phoenix, I like it. I'm a little surprised he didn't try to get one since he's already seen Hellions. The assumption of the 1-1-1 should have kind of been there, but at the same time, Clem did get the second barracks before the starport. So could have been a double, triple bluff. Who knows? Either way, Classic does get vision and a little bit of map control from these. So let's see what he continues to do.
Yeah, the interesting thing as well. So you talk about Oracles. Are they going to microwave a bunch of SCVs? I don't tend to like Oracles as a worker killing unit in this matchup because it takes 3 damage ticks to go and kill an SCV instead of 2. Just again, SCVs, they got a little bit more HP. It's 45.
Of course, you always take what they'll give you. Of course, yeah.
But I guess the point being here is it's extra surprising to see him. One Oracle, its job is to scout. If you get something, sure, fine, but its job is to scout, stasis trap, do whatever. So again, I am fairly surprised to see him get that second one because it just doesn't represent.
That was the biggest one, yeah.
Much of a damage increase. If you go to 3, fine, you can one shot, but you never see that. It's too much gas in this matchup. So for now, I mean, single Phoenix, double Oracle. This looks like Classic is playing PvZ.
Yeah, he's not worried about anything that's going to catch him or chase him down in the skies, right? Phoenix, Oracle, speed, both very good. Oracles are going to come into that mineral line now. He has the Phoenix kind of fly up ahead in case there was a Widow Mine, maybe. At the very least, the Phoenix tanks all the damage, goes down to 10 health. 2 SCVs die, but he also causes at least some sense of mild disruption there. Now, his third base is close to finishing up. Extended Thermal Lance is coming out. We have the first Colossus on the way. So Bayo, I guess this now turns to the other foot. Classics, Phoenix will see the double drop headed towards the main. So I think that should give him all the heads up he needs, but are there actually units here yet? I don't think so.
No, not really. Probes are gonna, Probes are now trapped in a corner here. You're like, they could have pulled their way into the natural, now they absolutely cannot. So,
wow.
Oh, well.
18 probes. 18 probe kills is that's pretty tough. That's pretty tough to deal with. So he kind of had everything watching towards the front. Those Hellions were still sharking, by the way. They actually are back in the natural. They just finally got killed. So he ends up with 20 probe kills. So if he has anything going for him, it's that Clem is only literally just now starting his third. But how significant is that when it's 45 SCVs plus mules to 32 probes? It's a pretty nice spot to be in if you're Clem. Unless Classic can get a crazy amount of damage done with this counterattack, he is just going to be, let's say, a little more like game 3 versus Oliveira, where it wasn't like quite that bad, but it was still maybe it was the later third shutdown, not the early third shutdown that ended up taking him down. Those probe kills, though, it's going to cost a lot of money to replace.
Yeah, okay, so maybe there's a world where Classic ran across the map with double Colossus because Clem, his army supply is not high. He doesn't have any Vikings, so there's not really a good Colossus answer. But if Classic's just going to sit back here and play defense, which he's been doing, that kind of seems to be his goal, he's going to have to, you're right, he's going to have some miraculous holds as he macros up as there's nothing on Classic. Okay, there we go. It's like, there's nothing on Classic production tab right now, but probes getting made, pylons getting made. Here's he, again, just tries to weather the coming storm because that's, for now, the supplies aren't that bad. 105, 93, sure. Clem's army supply is going to explode pretty soon, and we're going to be looking at Clem pushing with like plus 40 army supply into a Classic that has a... If you're going to play this style of Classic, I would much prefer this base. Much prefer the pocket third because, I mean, this third base is so wide open that it is... I mean, Classic, as down as he is, how do you expect to hold on to this area?
I think he's just playing it for the position, though, right? Because if you take the third, taking the southern third, while there may be arguments for it, it is expanding towards the opponent. And for Classic, I don't expect him to want to try and end the game in like terms of a big fight anytime soon, since it seems like his strategy is macro up to the point where he can make that transition into air, and then let the Terran just build the wrong units and die. So that's more or less what my expectations for this one are. So Clem will try his best to stymie that economic growth and slow him down, but Classic he's had a couple of fumbles between the warp prisms, and even some of the Oracle maneuvering earlier was a little dicey. So if there's anything that makes me a little nervous, it's trying to rely on 1 or 2 key specialist units here. For Classic, taking it nice and slow seems to be the play that makes sense, at least warming up in the earlier rounds here this event.
Yeah, I think that's fair. In fairness, Classic's in a really bad spot. Let's not make no bones about it.
Well, he lost 20 probes. There's not a lot to write home about here.
I was gonna say, but he's been building his army fairly nicely. He's gonna go up to 3 Colossus now. I think he delayed things just a little bit. Damage to Oracle, dives in on the other side, gets a couple workers. He's gonna have charge, maybe. No, it's not a guarantee, but maybe +1 by the time this move out hits from Clem. Looks like probably not. But if we're looking at the differentials here, with everything else, it's only 6 Vikings against soon-to-be 3 Colossus if he gets it out in time. It's a really hard hold, 100%, especially if that shield battery goes down. But this isn't an impossible hold setup for Classic. He's got a couple Phoenix to go, the kind of buffer for the Vikings a little bit, maybe lift up some Marauders. Again, it's hard, but he's been able to build an army that, at least in the short term, is something that can maybe fight against what Clem has.
Yeah, the only tough thing here is that if you're Clem, it does, at least to some degree, because he doesn't have a crazy amount of Vikings yet. It feels like it's mild bait too. His army, we talk about Classic's position being tough, and he has a lot of zealots that didn't have charge, for example, the whole time. It's just now finished, but he was kind of he's kind of trying to shoo him away, even from a slightly weak position. But three Colossi can be enough for this with the battery overcharge if he sneaks the probe out to the top right. But there's a Marine waiting for him, so I like this heads up play from Clem, just kind of recognizing if Classic doesn't have a fourth base, he's not going to be able to afford to go into carriers. And I think that's the real takeaway here is he's accepted that he can't force the fight, because as soon as he gets pushed back, the fourth goes up. So he just has to threaten the fight as much as possible without actually starting it, and I think that gives him that little bit of room to breathe. But Classic is now going to come up and take that fourth. So let's see where it goes from here. Storm is done, Prism is done. Do we see the Stargates drop? And if we do, how long does it take for him to get there? I feel that Clem will still be trying to force a big fight before that happens.
Yeah, I don't think you're allowed to go drop a bunch. You have one, sure. I don't think you're allowed to drop a bunch of Stargates at this point. You need that. You need those 8 gas, maybe even 10 gas. But, okay, so Classic, he can't get the optimal base, expanding away from his opponent like he would like to. But he does take a base that has a choke, that does allow him to really leverage this Colossus as well as he can. And who knows, maybe I'm too much on Hopium right now, but that is a great shot from the Colossus to start this off. We're going to see Storms on the Vikings as well. And to start this out, the supplies are still telling a pretty bad story, but Classic knocks a couple of the Vikings down, gets good splash damage done here. But Clem's able to rotate faster onto that fourth base. And we talked about the choke being really good for Classic if he holds it. Well, if he's not holding it from, EMP is on top of his army as well. Colossus, one of them's dead, second one's dead. EMP on the Archons knocks them down. And even as Classic kind of caught the army in the middle of the map and looked like he might have been able to get a couple good storms.
He got on a full fight away from all the batteries on like even ground. There was no force fields to pull the army apart, no shield battery overcharge. And again, that was everything to try and take that fourth base. It does not get much worse than that. Here we basically just see the snowball effect come to fruition off of the back of that huge drop earlier in the game, and Clem closes this one out nice.